This is Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast where we bring Jesus into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. We're so glad that you tuned into our show today. My email address, jason@sportspectrum.com, jason@sportspectrum.com. That's my direct email. You can hit me up if you got any ideas for future guests or just some thoughts on today's interview with Tom Ryan from Ohio State and the Buckeyes wrestling coach. You can email me directly, jason@sportspectrum.com. We are presented today by Ronald Blue Trust. Their advisors applying biblical wisdom and technical expertise to help clients make wise financial decisions to experience clarity and confidence and leave a lasting legacy. We all have a lot of questions regarding our finances, where we're going, where we've been, what's the future like, COVID-19, the pandemic, all sorts of questions. Ronald Blue Trust has the answers, and you can reach them directly right now by going to the website ronblue.com. ronblue.com. Today on Sports Spectrum, we welcome Tom Ryan. He is the Ohio State wrestling coach. This is one of the more decorated college coaches in the country in any sport. He's a two-time NCAA head coach of the year in 2009. In 2015, he arrived in Columbus as their coach in 2006. He led the Ohio State wrestling program to unprecedented heights, capturing the 2015 NCAA National Championship, and he's the NCAA team runner-up 5 times, 2008, 2009, 2017, 2018, and 2019. In 2020, of course, COVID-19 happened, so there was no national championship in the NCAA for wrestling this past year. He's a 3-time Big Ten Coach of the Year and has captured 3 Big Ten titles in a 4-year stretch. He's coached 6 different Buckeyes to 12 individual national titles, including 4-time champion Logan Stieber and Olympic gold medalist Kyle Snyder, who was a guest here on Sports Spectrum. He's a 3-time NCAA champion. But this interview, this conversation with Tom Ryan from Ohio State doesn't talk about wrestling much. We do talk about his journey into wrestling, growing up, and his passion and finding his desire to become a wrestler and then coach wrestling. And he talks about how wrestling became his God. But there's a poignant moment that happened to Tom and Tom's family in February of 2004 that altered his life forever. And not only that, but it created this opportunity for him to go on a journey to discover who God truly was and who God truly is. This is a very powerful conversation with Tom Ryan from Ohio State. He's the wrestling coach, and he joins us here today on Sports Spectrum. Coach Tom Ryan, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you.
It's good to talk to you. Good to see you as we tape this on Zoom. I want to start with Tom Ryan before the year 2004. And I know that was a poignant year for a lot of things, highs and lows, but give us a snapshot of maybe where you grew up, the role wrestling played in your life, and where your priorities were maybe at that time before, say, 2004, as your journey kind of led up to that poignant time.
Yeah, so the gift of time has taught me to kind of put life in a couple of different buckets. And before 2004, I was raised in Wantagh, New York, about 10 miles from the Atlantic Ocean, Jones Beach. Yep. I was gifted with an amazing family, something not everyone is gifted with. I had the blessing of a mother that was truthful and real with me, a father that believed in me, siblings, that were raised in a household. I said often, we didn't have much financially, but we had everything that a human being can build a life on. So I feel really blessed, at that. Started wrestling in 7th grade because I wasn't that good at basketball. That was my deep love. I really saw myself in the NBA at some point, but I got some truth from Mr. O'Leary back in 7th grade when he cut me from the basketball team. And then wrestling, it was an unanswered prayer. I was a small, aggressive, person. And my brother had said to me, he's 2 years older than me, who's a powerful figure in my life, Frank. He had said, "You're going to wrestle." Remember at that dinner that night after I got cut from the basketball team, I'm like, "Listen, I'm making that team next year. I'm not wrestling." And one of the big deterrents I remember for wrestling was the uniform. So if you see any wrestling matches, the singlet kind of threw me off a bit. And he's like, "Listen, you don't wear the singlet in practice, come to practice." So I'll never forget my first practice. It was instant love. It was a moment I remember because I loved it. And in seventh grade is when kind of my wrestling journey began. And that's kind of when wrestling became my God, right? Wrestling was the center of my life, and all experiences in my life, even from that seventh grade year, was circled around wrestling. What I ate, what I did over the summer, my mornings, my afternoons. It really became a deep passion and love of mine to be an elite level wrestler. Fast forward, I started to get good at it. I learned suffering at a young age, and the incredible value of choosing the hard way. And I don't think I would have called it chosen suffering as a young kid. Yeah. But I think now, reflecting on my life, it absolutely, and the people I'm around and the successful men and women that I see in this world, there's an element of suffering that just has to occur for us to move forward and grow. And it's chosen suffering. Sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's not. The chosen suffering that I've experienced, I mean, I know people in my life that are amazing leaders now that, chose alcohol over help, right? And chose drugs. And when they're rock bottom, that chosen suffering let them down. But ultimately, they fought their way out of it. And they're amazing for it, for having gone through it and the things they learned from it. So the chosen suffering I'm referring to are just the hard things that we do that help us grow in a positive way. So chosen suffering, I signed a full scholarship to Syracuse. That's where my brother was. I was going to wrestle in college. He and I were roommates, and I really enjoyed, just being around him. I had wanted to go to the University of Iowa, which is where I spent most of my summers, at a 4-week intensive camp, which was run by a guy named Jay Robinson, who's a difference maker in the world, because he understands suffering. He was a Ranger, and most parents don't want their kids to suffer. But we know it's good for them. And it's like this dichotomy, this challenge that we live with. So I went to camp every summer and then learned the power of hard work there, signed a full scholarship to Syracuse. And then 2 years into that time period, I realized that I needed to be around people that would be harder on me. And I love Syracuse. I had a great experience there. But just from a wrestling standpoint, I needed to be around people that would expose my weaknesses on a more consistent basis. So I packed my car. Obviously, my brother was a senior that year. He was a finance major. I asked him to come with me. I'm like, "Hey, we'll go to Iowa. I'll be the 150-pounder. You'll be the 158-pounder. Those are two of the weight classes in college." He's like, "Listen, man." He had like a 4.0 in finance. He's like, "I'm going to law school, and it's not going to work for me, but you go." And, he always supported me, even though it was tough on him to lose his main training partner. So anyway, I packed my car and I drive to the University of Iowa. Stayed, first night, I stayed in this guy's apartment who I knew because he was out at Syracuse training for a few days. Anyway, long story short, I enrolled at the University of Iowa. I experienced a lot of discomfort, but ultimately it brought me truth, which was ultimately, I guess, what I was seeking more than anything was just truth. How good could I be at something I love? And that place, like Ohio State now, was a place where inside the wrestling room, you can learn a lot about yourself if you want to.
When did coaching become a thing for you, or was that sort of always the next gradual step after, actually being a wrestler? It's like, okay, well, the next thing is to be a coach because you had such a passion for it. When did coaching kind of come into the frame?
Yeah, wrestling is, there's not that many opportunities, strong opportunities in the sport to be just a coach, right? Normally you're a teaching coach, right? You teach math, English, and you coach the wrestling team. My senior year at the Big Tens, Dwayne Goldman approached me, who was a former Iowa wrestler, a standout there, was now the Indiana wrestling coach. And he asked me, hey, you interested in coaching on the college level? So I said, listen, let's let the season come to a close here, and then I'll give you a call, and I'll come down to Bloomington and see what I think. So it really, I wasn't like born. I didn't, I never had a sense it was a calling. I do now, but I think it wasn't like, hey, God sprinkled this fairy dust on me and said, hey, your whole life you're going to long to coach. But as soon as I got involved in coaching, I love coaching.
So, your journey of faith, I know, hit a crossroads at a time that, no parent would ever wish for. You talked about suffering. No parent would ever want to go through what you and your family went through with your son Teague. But I'm wondering if you could kind of share a little snapshot of family life, and then, tell everybody what happened with Teague and maybe how your faith was impacted.
Yeah, I mean, life was incredible. So I was at Indiana University for 2 years. My second year there, life really changed for the better. And that's when I met Lynette Wilkerson. We started dating, got married. We moved to the University of Iowa. I was going to try to make an Olympic team there. So I went back to train there. Once I got there, I was there for a couple months. And then the Hofstra University head coaching job opened up. And, I talked with Coach Gable, who's a legendary coach at the University of Iowa. And, to get a head coaching job at a young age, the reality was that I was going to have to wrestle better than I'd ever wrestled before to make the Olympic team. So it was just a big boy conversation with myself, right? I didn't quit on wrestling. It was just, look, the reality is that I should probably get into coaching, right? So I interviewed at Hofstra University, got the job there. We moved our family out to Long Island, New York. Now, Hofstra was about 6 miles from where I grew up. So it was the right time, right place. Now I believe, looking back, there is no coincidence. The fact that they needed a coach and I was coming through the ranks, it all lined up extremely well. So I got the job at Hofstra. We were raising 4 kids. We were at Hofstra for 11 years, and life was great. We each had our own car. My wife and I, we had a swimming pool.
Yep.
We had air conditioning, which was a big deal because, we grew up without it. And we all had window fans, which you may or may not recall, but it's just a fan in the window.
Sure, of course.
So, life was just good. I mean, life was good. It wasn't like without struggles, the coaching life and managing a marriage and 4 children is hard work and takes a lot of teamwork, and there were struggles, but overall we were really blessed to be in the position that we were in.
Tell us about Teague.
So we have 4 children. My oldest is Jordan. He's 28 now. My second son is Jake, 25, Teague, 21, and Mackenzie, 19. So we had 3 boys and finally got my daughter. And I say this without hesitation, right? Every woman, every little girl and boy should have a figure in their life that's willing to die for them. And I think that that's something that should be a guarantee, but it's not in this world. But it is in my case. And we were just living an incredibly blessed life. So Teague was 5. He was a little wrestler. He was strong. He was a coach's son, right? So, my profession gave him the added advantage of being around elite people, like my team. And he spent a lot of time in the wrestling room, and he would travel with me because he was just starting school. So when I would go on road trips, he was with me. He had 2 older brothers that challenged him, as older brothers do. And as my brother referred to him, as he was a rainbow after a sun shower, after a rain shower. He was just an amazing kid, and I loved him dearly. So what happened was on February 16, 2004, it was President's Day. My family came to work with me. My kids gave wife a break because there was no school that Monday. We played in the room all day, and it was one of those days that most parents reflect on as one of the great days of your life when you're spending time with your kids. So Teague we played all day. We got home at 6:30 for dinner. Dinner was on the table. I had a meeting that night with my booster club. I let them know I wasn't going to be there, and that here's what I was hoping would happen. And so they said, no problem, we'll take care of it. And we had a great family dinner. We laughed. We talked about the day and the great things that happened that day. And then Teague was voted to shower first, and he was pissed. So we got up from the dinner table, started running around. My wife was chasing him. We were laughing, get him, get him. It was a kind of a game of hide and go seek ensued. My wife picked him up. And I know without question, at the moment she picked him up, I was overwhelmed by a sensation. And people may say, well, you're a little goofy, but I'm not goofy. It is absolutely, I felt something overwhelm me when I looked at the way he was hanging in her arms. And I remember I was going to say to her, be careful the way you're holding him. Now, this was a kid that could do 10 pull-ups at 5. He could wrestle forever. He wasn't your typical 5-year-old. Yeah. Because, the environment he was in was a physical environment. So she took him to the back of the house, and me and the other children were at the dinner table still talking. And she started screaming for me to come to the back of the house. So I ran to the back of the house, and I grabbed Teague, and I put him on the coffee table, and I checked his pulse, and I couldn't get one, and his eyes rolled back in his head. My wife called 911. I was performing CPR on him, trying to keep him awake and alive. And the ambulance took 14 minutes to get there. About 7 or 8 minutes in, I picked him up because I heard an ambulance. I thought I heard a siren. So I picked him up and ran him out the front door. And I ran him about 150, 200 yards to the top of the street because I knew that he needed professional attention. But it wasn't the ambulance. It was a cop car and a different call. So I ran him back into the house and put him on the table and continued to work on him. And then finally the ambulance arrived 14 minutes later. They grabbed him, code blue, threw him in the ambulance. My wife and I jumped in the car, followed behind. My kids stayed at the house. We had a neighbor friend at the house, stay with the kids. We got to the hospital, called my brother on the way, prayed with my wife on the way. Within an hour and a half of being at the hospital, a lot of family had been there and gathered. And that's when the surgeon came out and told us that he was sorry that they could not save his life. And that's when wrestling stopped becoming my God, I would say.
A quick break to tell you about our friends at Ronald Blue Trust. They're advisors applying biblical wisdom and technical expertise to help their clients make wise financial decisions to experience clarity and confidence and leave a lasting legacy. Their comprehensive, certified financial planning professionals offer financial planning, investment management services, and like I said, based on biblical principles to individuals and families across the United States who are beyond the debt problem but want to be good stewards of their wealth. Listen, 35 years of experience, lots of questions, coming off really in the midst of a pandemic, and then kind of 6 months, 7 months in here. What do we do with our finances? Some of us have been hit really hard financially. Others still have their job, but they're not sure. There's a lot of questions. Ronald Blue Trust is the place to go to ask those questions. Go to ronblue.com. That's their website, ronblue.com. Tell them Sports Spectrum sent you, and I promise you can trust them. Ronald Blue Trust, ronblue.com. Tom Ryan is our guest here on Sports Spectrum, Ohio State wrestling coach. I may have missed it. I should have asked this earlier. What caused his death? That's so it doesn't seem right? Because he's 5 years old, he's healthy, he's taking baths, he's hanging out with you. There was no previous medical history that you knew of, right?
No, we had a healthy family. I mean, my aunts, uncles, I mean, it was just, genetically, there was nothing we could find. There were no warning signs whatsoever. He just had a physical. I mean, he had, an enormous amount of, lean muscle mass for a 5-year-old. There were no warning signs anywhere. So yeah, we weren't looking out for anything. So what he died of, he basically died of a massive heart attack.
Wow.
Yeah, he died of a heart attack. There's a lot of blessings along the way. There's a lot of non-coincidences that have happened since the day he passed. Ultimately, there are, I think, 10 million mice with his DNA in them right now at the Ohio State Genetics Center. And they believe they found a gene which we didn't know, right? When he died, we wanted closure, right? Like you just asked, it's like, well, what the heck happened? What did we miss? Are other children vulnerable? We thought it was long QT syndrome. My oldest son, Jordan, couldn't sleep at night for a long time. He was afraid if he went to bed, he'd never wake up because he thought it was long QT, and that's genetic. So he was concerned, and we had everyone tested, and it seemed like he may have it, Jordan. So it was hard on him for a while. But, you know, we cried a lot together, and we huddled together a lot, and we got through it together. The kids really were a major factor in us getting through it, right? Because, you know, you read stories and you hear, and I was watching Oprah, and I don't want to get too far off track your question, but, you know, you hear stories about people that lost children and marriages break up and the children become struggling adults because they never got the parenting and the example they needed in their life. And that wasn't going to happen with us, but we needed some counseling to kind of snap us out of it, to make us realize that, listen, you're kind of in a fog, you better get out of it. Because if you stay in it, your children ultimately will react to this in direct correlation to the way you are. So you better grow up, and you better man up, and you better pick up the burden that you didn't ask for, but you have, and you better manage it. And, you know, that helped me. That helped me a lot. But ultimately, it was a heart attack that took his life.
When did it become a point when you were able to talk about it? You know, obviously, you know, your story is going to help impact others on some level, right? Somebody may have gone through something similar to you, a loss, grief, whatever it is, the power of believing, the power of still God being able to kind of use this for his glory somehow.
Sure.
But when do you get to the point where you're able to share and talk about this?
I think, you know, to your point, right, we all want our children to make a difference in the world. We want them to leave the place better than they found it. I think that's inherently what we're after. We get sidetracked at times, but I think that inherently that's what the end goal is. Leave this place better and get to heaven. I would say that's an end goal. And I think for me, there was a lot of pain. You know, I did not know God. I wasn't like a non-believer. I was raised Catholic, right? I believed in God, but it wasn't like, you know, I was running around as an atheist proclaiming that I had studied deeply into the meaning of life and the beginning of life. And I've come up with the fact that atheism makes the most sense. I was just living a busy life like most of us, paying the bills and trying to coach a team and dealing with the relationship. So the first thing I had to do was get me right. You know, I really couldn't talk about him until I was right. And I was in a bad place. My wife was in a bad place. Our relationship was in a bad place. And we got professional help, which I highly recommend people do when they're struggling. I don't recommend going in a dark hole and thinking you're alone, because you're not. And I consider myself an extremely tough person that lives in reality, that my truth is real truth. I don't make stuff up in my own head and then live in it, which is a dangerous place to live. But I had to come to terms with his loss. And what really inspired me in the midst of this burden that was thrust on me was when we pulled up to the house coming back from the hospital. My son Jake and my son Jordan and Mackenzie ran down the staircase outside to greet us at the car, and they asked us a simple question. And it's the power of common sense in our lives. When we ask the right questions with an open mind, it's amazing the answers we'll get. And he said to me, Jake did, "Where's Teague?" Which is a pretty simple question, and a basic one, and a common sense question. And I answered, "I'm sorry." And I would say that question stayed with me. Where is he? And the fact that I couldn't answer definitively, but I could tell him the name of every recruit in the country that I wanted, and I can tell him the tendencies of every student athlete that I coached, and I could tell him why I bought the car I bought, you know, and why I married the woman I married, and why I chose to go to the school I went to. There's so many decisions I had made were so well thought out, but this one I had never considered. It became, I would say, the impetus of my recovery. And that's seeking truth. And that's, where is he? Where could he be? What are the options presented to me as a human being that would move me toward believing one thing or another? And I pursued that with every ounce of me, with my free time.
So take me through that journey, that spiritual journey of that question, and how it really showed you. You said pursuing truth, purpose, all of those kind of buzzwords that you hear in the faith. Take me through that journey and kind of maybe how you were able to discover who God was and his plan for your life.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, if I'm going to buy a piece of equipment for my team, I confirm its validity by using it first, right? If I'm going to have someone talk to my team or be around my team, around anybody that I care about, I confirm that, that it's going to be a beneficial thing, right, for them. So what I did was I took a piece of paper ultimately and I lined it. And on the left side was no God. And on the right side was God. And that's where the journey began. It wasn't, like most of us do very often. I've done this in my life before. You make up your mind on something and then you only apply the facts that move you toward what you've already made your mind up about. That's not truth. So I went the opposite route and I lined the piece of paper, God, no God. I consider the only two options. I mean, I don't believe that in aliens, right? I don't believe in reincarnation in terms of coming back as something. I don't believe in that. So I felt like the two options, and that's in no means to knock anyone who feels that could be right.
Sure.
This is just my life, my story, not to offend anybody in any way, but it's just my truth. So there were two options. There's either a God that created everything, right? Or there's not. So that was the fundamental start of my journey forward. And I watched a ton of stuff on evolution, a ton of DVDs, and I studied evolution. Of course, we know evolution is real. The question is, can evolution happen at a level where you go from one species to another? Personally, I don't believe that's ever happened, and don't believe that's what happened. And then I studied God, and I learned about Jesus and his life and who he said he was. I met with people that had poured their life into this same journey that I was on. I leaned on people that had 40 years of experience in the journey and not me, who was a newbie. And ultimately, I had a ton of information. And when you have a decision to make, you got to make a decision. And I took all the information. And like when I bought my car, that was a 6-passenger, and got rid of my 4-passenger because I had 4 kids. The 4-passenger didn't work anymore. I had to choose. And I took all the information I chose, and I chose that Jesus was who he said he was. And I don't run around wagging my finger at people. I'm a broken human being, and my shortcomings have nothing to do with who he was. And ultimately, I dropped to my knees. I've heard it said, and I believe this, is, modern man has a hard time finding God because we don't look low enough. And I was low. And, I've been challenged with, well, you needed that. It comforted you. That's a ridiculous and unfair statement to me. Did I need comfort? Of course. Did I need purpose? Of course. But not at the expense of pursuing truthful data that I believe has a lot of common sense behind it. Sure, it's hard to believe there's some mystical creature, being that created everything. That's not easy to believe. But it was harder for me to believe, with all the beauty I see around me, that could happen by chance. Everything built has a designer on this planet, right? Everything built has had a designer. Nothing beautiful is here by accident. And to think that the most beautiful creation in the history of time was an accident, it just didn't add up for me. So ultimately I moved forward and became a believer.
So how did that change you? You know, what happened after that? I know you talked about wrestling didn't, you know, or wasn't your God anymore, I guess, but it's not just about wrestling, even though that's, you know, how we connect. And that's what your title is, if you will, Ohio State wrestling coach, but you're still a husband and a dad, and all of that is still going on. So how does that newfound faith or that journey, and maybe bring it all the way to where we are now, you know, how has that impacted your life and changed how you go about living every day?
I think the lessons in scripture are just, I think they're incredible. They're incredible for a reason. No matter what we go through in life, you can find an understanding, an explanation, one that may still be very painful in scripture. So I've just come to terms, I think, with just that reality that life is about suffering, that life is hard, and there's many train tracks running side by side in our lives, and some are beautiful and some are incredibly difficult to manage. And that, you know, I said this earlier, but there are chosen and unchosen sufferings that are bestowed upon us as human beings. And my ultimate goal is to get to heaven and bring as many people as I can with me. And yeah, I got you. So
let me ask you, as we wind down, let me ask you this question, Coach. Your purpose now, and knowing where your purpose is, understanding that others have gone through this too, and that you're not alone.
Sure.
How has that helped you in knowing that your story, specifically with what took place with Teague, hearing someone else say that I'm going through this too, or I have gone through this, how important was that for you?
Yeah, that was incredibly powerful for me. You know, the amazing thing is that initially my journey toward faith was incredibly selfish, which is ironic because the faith is the opposite of being selfish, right? And it was basically just being with him, right? That was a driving force for me initially. And that's that, you know, there is eternity. And the irony in the whole thing is that the more I got to know him, the more I fell in love with him. Like I'd never met anybody on earth like the teachings I was learning from Christ. So it's like, you know, I mean, the only way, you know, and you know, me holding a sign in the corner of a street screaming that Jesus is the way is a difficult way to get anybody to move toward him. The only way we move toward anything is to get to know that thing, right? Yeah. I married Lynette because I spent time with her and I dated her and I saw what she was like under duress, and I saw what she was like around kids, and I got to know her. So getting to know him was, you know, incredibly powerful for me. And that's ultimately why I moved in the direction. And I learned, you know, so what it ultimately also taught me was that I was fortunate. Like, how could someone who had so much hurt in him was curled up in a ball, begging for mercy, right? You tell, like, anyone that doubts what I'm saying, like, I was broken, and now I'm not. And there's one reason for it, and that's grace. I don't know what else I can say other than that was the overwhelming experience. And I remember thinking to myself, at some point, I actually was grateful that he passed the way he passed. Right? So you go from being angry and just broken to, man, you know, I was reading the story, or I got this email from this parent that saw my story, and her son died overseas and was, you know, was stepped on an IED, right? Was suffered from, one of my great friends, Greg Trun's daughter died at 4 years old of brain cancer. He walked her through the last 6 months of her life. They told her she had 6 months, so she was losing her balance. and all this tragedy and all this hurt and all this pain. And my son went the way any human being would long to go. Take me that way. Sign me up for that end. And it gave me perspective. And I think what I have more than anything that I didn't have in 2004 is a different perspective on the sufferings that people go through, because it's hard to relate to anything we haven't experienced ourselves, right? We can say we do, and I would say, well, wow, I could relate to someone who lost a child, but I couldn't until I did, and now I can. And I wanted to be around people that had lost children. I gravitated toward them. I seeked out people that were suffering like I was so that I could kind of understand, try to understand what they went through. Oprah Winfrey helped me. I happened to turn on the TV, and I never watched Oprah, and I love Oprah, but I couldn't watch Oprah because I was at practice. My life was practice from 2:30 to 5 every day of my life, pretty much. And after we lost Teague, Oprah, I happened to sitting on the couch and flip the TV on, and she was on. And there was a woman on that was sharing the story of her life. And basically what happened was she was in the card store. Her children were in the car. Her 6 children were in the car. She was in the card store for 1 minute. They were going to a birthday party. She hears an explosion. She turns around. It's her car. Can't get the kids out. And I'm watching this about a week after I lost my son. And they can't get the kids out. They finally get the kids out. And she's telling the story on the stage. And then her kids come up onto the stage. I'm like, oh, my God, all of them lived. Oh, my God. And when they sat down, none of her children were recognizable. All their faces had melted. Their hands had melted. And they were praising glory to their mother. And I was just like so overwhelmed, almost with a feeling of selfishness. Like, why did you think that you would get out of this life unscathed like this? What was it about your life that you thought that it was going to be so easy? And then you read books like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and books that just rock your world and the experience that people have had. And somehow, some way, this deep loss, you carry it and it becomes a gift. And that's my greatest gift is Teague.
Coach Tom Ryan, this has been really great. Thank you for being willing to share your story. I have one last question, and it's not the question I usually ask on this show, but I wrote a book on forgiveness, and this was me having to forgive someone who hurt me. I wonder what you've learned about forgiveness in the sense of maybe it's forgiving yourself, maybe it's forgiving or asking for forgiveness from God and allowing yourself to be angry at God through the process. But when I talk about forgiveness or bring that word up, what comes to mind?
I think, the power of forgiveness. I think that it's an attribute, it's a decision that's critically important, that I've learned that through faith, that we are demanded to forgive ourselves, right? Forgiving ourselves, it's about me more than about them. That I've got to learn. If God can forgive us and we can forgive ourselves, then ultimately what we're doing is we're placing ourselves above him. He says, no matter what you do, you'll be loved and forgiven. So yeah, forgiveness is a powerful thing in this world, and it's not an easy thing, but it's something. I can't imagine a life. I can imagine a life where we never forgive ourselves or others, and the burden that we would carry through our lives can make life extremely heavy. So I'd like to hear more about that book. Maybe you could share it with me, and I'll share mine with you. I just wrote a book called Chosen Suffering that just came out.
Absolutely. Tell us about the book real quick while we close.
Yeah, no, it's just about some of the stories I shared and some other stories just about me learning through life that there's 2 types of suffering. There's chosen and unchosen, and those different burdens that we pick up along the way, and that the most fundamental way of knowing where we don't want to be is learning how bad things can be, and moving as far away from those things as we possibly can. So chosen are just the things in my life that I chose to do that were really hard on me and the lessons I learned. And then unchosen is obviously the story of Teague. That was a burden that I mean, look, I could have chosen the other option, right? Like you, right? You could have chosen to not forgive and carry this burden and have it destroy your life and those around you. But what kind of option is that? I mean, that's just an illogical option.
Yeah.
So God bless you for choosing, and God bless me for choosing.
Well, thank you for writing that book, and I can't wait to read it, Chosen Suffering. You're an inspiration. You're awesome for coming on the show today, and I'm so glad that next time I want to talk about leadership with you. I want to talk about Ohio State, but we'll just have to do a second show sometime. And maybe once we get through COVID here in the 2020-2021 season, we'll have you back on. Tom Ryan, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
And many thanks to Tom Ryan, the Ohio State wrestling coach, for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. What a story he has. I mean, just incredibly powerful and inspiring to me. And wow, chosensuffering.com. That's the website to learn more about Tom's book. And then, of course, the new book is called Chosen Suffering, which is awesome. And I'm so glad that it's out and you can go read a little bit more about his story. So highly recommend you go pick that up. You can give him a follow on Twitter at Buckeye158. Buckeye158. He is Tom Ryan, and I'm grateful that he joined us here today on Sports Spectrum. Many thanks to Tom. We also want to thank our sponsors and partners today. Ronald Blue Trust, the company's certified financial planning professionals, offering comprehensive financial planning and investment management services based on biblical principles to individuals and families across the U.S. who are beyond the debt problem stage but want to be good stewards of their wealth. This is the time right now to reach out to Ronald Blue Trust and ask them the questions, the hard questions that you may have about your finances and your future. The website, ronblue.com, ronblue.com. We also want to direct you to our website, sportspectrum.com. That's the home base for all of our content here at Sports Spectrum. We have daily devotionals. We have all sorts of content and articles and stories written each day on the website. And then, of course, every single podcast can be listened to and found there as well at sportspectrum.com. We've got a couple other places that you can go to stay in touch with us here at Sports Spectrum. Our social media pages, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. Just search Sports Spectrum, and you can like us or follow us there. Also, our YouTube channel, which is a great place to subscribe. Our podcast is found there as well to listen to for free. And we have a lot of other videos and different stories that are found on our YouTube channel as well. So check that out on YouTube. You can search Sports Spectrum and subscribe there. And lastly, whatever app that you listen to this podcast on, for me, I listen to podcasts on Spotify and sometimes on Apple. But wherever you listen, do us a favor, click that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. Because click subscribe and you'll be good to go. We got over 600 episodes now of Sports Spectrum's podcast, and it's a great place to turn to and listen to these encouraging stories like Tom Ryan from Ohio State here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. We are so grateful that you tuned in today. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. Have a great rest of your day.